welcoming
There we go.
Nick Adkins, Professor Sherry Pagoto, Professor Ellen Beckjord, Professor Don Dyson, and Professor Esther Chu.
With our pink.
Get ready.
There we are.
Oh, Roy, my friend.
How you doing, my old mate? I'm
Good
going
to
to
see
say,
you.
I'm
Yeah.
smiling.
Yeah, there it is.
Nick, how you doing?
Good to see you, Roy.
And it's very good to see you, and thank you for joining us. I think your time, tell us, it's some ungodly time in the morning, is it? What time is it?
It's 8:15 in the morning here on the East Coast, where three of us are, and then it's 5 a.m., 5:15 in the morning over in the Pacific Northwest, where Dr. Chu is in Portland, Oregon. So it's early for all of us, but definitely early over in Portland.
Well, it's just after lunchtime here at 1:18.
Yeah.
It's great. Well, Nick, I know you've got a lineup of fabulous speakers. I know you've got a great conversation for us, so I'm going to lurk and over to you.
Yeah. All right. I think everybody's in here, and Roy, I really appreciate you inviting us to join you guys. Real big fans of the work you're doing, being a voice for the NHS. So many good people throughout the NHS, you know, I mean, and this has been really tough to not see people in real life. I know you're a hugger like me, Roy, so this is hitting you as hard as it's hitting me. So this will soon be over and we'll be back to hugging people in real life. So and thanks to Shane and Teresa and everyone involved really for giving us a moment. So what happened was Roy and Teresa and Shane reached out and said, hey, would you like to put a panel together to talk about post-traumatic growth? How do we go forward from where we are now in this pause that the pandemic is causing? And so I reached out to some of my favorite people who are all scientists, because I like to surround myself with science. That's what I believe. And these are the thought leaders here in the United States and, dare I say, the world on this topic. And I'll introduce them in alphabetical order by their last name. So first is Dr. Ellen Beckjord. Hello, Ellen. Dr. Beckjord.
Good morning.
Dr. Beckjord is Associate Vice President at UPMC Health Plan, where she oversees population health. A lot of folks that she manages, helps manage health for. Our next guest is Dr. Esther Chu. Dr. Chu is in Portland, Oregon, where she's a professor of medicine in the emergency department there at the teaching hospital, OHSU in Portland. I don't know if we can see Dr. Chu yet.
It may just help you, Nick. It's voice activated, so when you speak, you'll come up on the screen. It's to cut down on the bandwidth need. You understand the thing? Yeah. Okay. So when you speak, you come up.
Good morning, Dr. Chu.
Good morning.
Hey, good to see you. Thank you for joining us so early.
My pleasure.
Big pleasure. Roy, let me tell you, you know, as big a deal as you are in the UK, Dr. Chu is bigger here in the US. So that she is joining us at 5 a.m. in the morning is huge. So thank you, Dr. Chu.
Well, thank you for that. Perhaps we should get together and go for global domination. What do you think?
Yeah, you should. Next is Dr. Don Dyson, who's in Rhode Island. Dr. Don Dyson is a professor of medicine at Brown University. He's an oncologist by training, and with a specialty on women's sexual health. So, Dr. Dyson, good morning.
Morning, everybody. Morning.
And are you actually in Rhode Island, or are you in Boston, or where are you today?
Nope, I'm actually in the South Shore of Massachusetts. So I'm working from home.
All right, good.
Yeah.
Like all of us. And then our final panelist is Dr. Sherry Pagoto, who is a clinical psychologist at the University of Connecticut. Dr. Pagoto,
Good morning.
good morning.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
You can.
Great.
All right. And so is each of you, we're going to start talking about this. If you want to say anything else about what you do, that'll be great. We have a limited time here, so I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on going through each one of your CVs. Just for the audience, I'll tell you these people are super smart. They are scientific super freaks is what these folks are. And, you know, I'm really honored and grateful that I get to meet a lot of really smart, cool, nice people in what I do all around the world. And so when I say these are some of the best, I'm not kidding. They're some of the best. So big thank you for all of you joining us. The event posed the topic for the panel to speak to post-traumatic growth. But here's the deal. It was like, what have we learned? What lessons have we taken away from COVID-19, from this pandemic? And what I want us to do as a panel is not speak in past tense. This pandemic is not over, right? We're in it. And so what have we learned? Yes, but what are we learning? Because we're learning stuff every day, it seems. So
yeah, I can start for you, Nick.
We can share with our friends in the NHS as they're going through similar times and challenges. What's been each of your takeaways so far, and kind of recommendations on how we move forward with the good things. Don, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to start. So I think what we're learning, and we had to learn very quickly, is obviously how to deliver care remotely. With the pandemic, everyone's clinics, at least in the cancer space for sure, switched to remote health. But with that came some really great opportunities. So, the federal mandates on who you can see in your clinics were kind of shifted. So my patients who lived in Massachusetts, I could see them across state lines. And if a patient of mine went to somewhere further away, I could still do their visit via telehealth. That used to not be the case. So it certainly shows that it's possible to deliver care to people who are not able to see you in person. But for me, it's actually sparked a second discussion, and I think it's national. I'd love to hear what everybody's thoughts are. Why is it when I, as a physician, apply for privileges or a state license, it's limited to the state? Why can't we have something more broad that covers a national medical license? I mean, I think this is where I'm going with this. But certainly the adoption of telehealth isn't going to go away. And with that, now comes the conversation of the reimbursement of it. Oh yeah, the globalization. But in terms of reimbursements, all of this is that, yeah, we're going to pay the same as you did for an in-person visit. Everyone is wondering when that's going to go away or if it's going to be the same.
Right. Yeah. So we here in the U.S. we have just a huge mountain of challenges around reimbursement and how doctors get paid, and that's a week-long conversation that we'll avoid. So, Dr. Chu, how are things going in the ED at OHSU? I know I've been watching the statistics on Oregon since I used to live in Portland and have a lot of friends and family there who I love dearly and keep in touch with. And so what's been the real world on the ground in the ED there at OHSU? What have you been seeing from the virus?
Yeah, well, in Oregon, we did a pretty good job early on in flattening the curve, as we say, getting public health measures that were pretty widely taken up. And we did well early on. And then you could see people start to relax. A lot of what I've been doing in this pandemic is help with public messaging. And, I think we really saw fatigue around these public health messaging. Of course, we completely shut down, in the kind of spring to early summer. And that was pretty devastating for people. And, we never imagined that we'd be here in October, headed into November, and still doing this. And I think there was real fatigue. And when people fatigue, it didn't become, I need to get out a little. It became, I need to get out and just have a big 100-person gathering. You know, people kind of gave up in big ways, and that's why we're one super spreader event after another, I think. And I you know, later on top of that, of course,
everybody don't go to Mount Tabor Park today. There's plenty of other parks to go to. Don't go to the same park.
Yeah. You can drive around my neighborhood and actually see gatherings of like 50 or 75 people without any masks on. And I think people were very shut down. I mean, we had days in the emergency department where I saw 5 patients an entire shift because people were so shut down. And then when they got out, they just got out big. And so, you know, we're seeing our case counts and our hospital visits and our hospitalizations rise now into the fall as we go into colder weather and into flu season. So, you know, there's a lot of aspects to it. You know, our traditional public health messaging, we're not used to doing this over sustained periods of time with information that changes, you know, and I think having to educate the public around good science actually changes, particularly with a new disease. That's new, you know. I mean, it's one thing to say everyone should wear seatbelts, everyone should wear seatbelts. That's like a stable message over time. It's another thing to say we're learning a lot about different social distancing measures and mask wearing and medications that work. And, you know, we're going to learn a lot about the vaccines that are out. And so good science changes. What people hear is you are lying to us because you said this in February, and then you said this in May, and then you said this in August, and now you're saying this in October. So it's been incredibly challenging from a messaging viewpoint. I'm drifting away from the hospital issue, which is, you know, hospital management has also been so challenging, and I can talk more about any of these issues, but it turns out we thought we were ready for disasters. We are ready for disasters. Every hospital has a disaster plan, but they don't have a disaster plan for a disaster that's national and sustained over months. We are ready for a bus overturning or a single mass casualty or a regional national disaster. We're not ready for something that's sustained. And then I'd say the other piece of it is we didn't have very sophisticated plans for the ethical issues that come up when there is scarcity of almost every important resource to take care of the sickest patients. And that conversation had to be started de novo because we've actually never been challenged like this on specific resources. So this entire thing has been such a learning curve. I would say for our health system, overall, it was pretty complacent and confident in its ability to respond to a crisis of large proportions.
You had everything ready for Mount Hood to explode.
You're ready for that.
Mount Hood exploded, you got that covered, but the hospital wasn't ready for a global pandemic.
Right. Not this. Not even close.
Dr. Pagoto, how are things in Connecticut? I know I've been following the work you're doing in social media and attitudes and activities of college students. Maybe you'd like to hear some of that research.
Sure. Yeah, so we spent the summer interviewing college students around the nation about the impacts of the pandemic on them. So obviously, as everybody knows, university and college students were displaced from campuses back in March. They had to immediately relocate at a moment's notice and go into virtual learning. So this very much changed their educational experiences. And for many of them, it led to the decision to take gap years this academic year. So from an academic standpoint, there are a lot of things that I think we need to be thinking about, particularly as it pertains to racial and ethnic minority students, particularly in different fields. Like we've been really focused on STEM majors because we're worried about the STEM pipeline, where we do have an underrepresentation of women and racial and ethnic minorities, and the stress of the pandemic on the educational experience has been profound and literally has driven some people away from college temporarily. But we know when people take a gap year, there's a very big risk that they won't return. And so what will that mean for their education and their economic potential in the future? The other aspect, and this relates back to something that was said a little bit earlier, has to do with the mental health impact. So counseling centers before the pandemic on a university campus have always had wait lists. And so sending students away in terms of licensing in the mental health space, we have an issue too, where we're licensed in particular states. So the American Psychological Association, championed a change to where we could temporarily practice across state lines. That's great. It's only temporary. Hopefully that becomes permanent. But the lack of access to mental health care is a real issue for undergraduate students. I guess one sort of ray of light related to that is I'm really impressed by this generation's ability to talk about their mental health. Thinking back to my own generation, it's really encouraging that they're able to have the conversation. Not everybody's comfortable with it yet, but the amount of people who are is really impressive. And I think there's enough people having that conversation about the mental health impacts of this. It's going to make other people comfortable having those conversations too. If you go to Reddit, the subreddits for any university, and just browse, you'll see all kinds of conversations about mental health. So I don't know if it's social media makes it easier to have these conversations, but they shared their mental health struggles with us too. So I think that's a bit of good news, is that the conversation is easier to start and easier to have, but we do need to have services available, and we need to kind of, again, we weren't prepared for the typical mental health challenges on campus, and so we certainly weren't prepared, back to Dr. Chu's point, for this type of sustained mental health crisis on campus.
Right. I mean, this thing has, people who had some stigma around mental health and who didn't want to talk about it. I mean, I know, in the Twitter space that we're all in, there's several hashtags about mental health that to get people to discuss in the open without any stigma or shame attached to it. And it's a beautiful thing to see people coming together, sharing their own experience, being there to listen and feel someone else's experience, and just the group dynamic of healing that happens in that space. And so if the pandemic's done anything, it's in mental health, it's that, guess what? Oh, we've all got mental health issues now. It's
Absolutely.
not just you and her and mom and dad. Hey, guess what? Take a number. We're all in this thing. We're all depressed. We're all stressed out. And so, like, you just look at somebody and go, hey, yeah, me too. And I would think that therapy, online therapy, telemedicine, behavioral health sessions would just be like hard to get into, hard to find a therapist that's got some time available. So if everybody's got a therapist locked in on the calendar, I'd say congratulations.
Absolutely.
And if you don't, I hope you can find one. So, and speaking of that, I'll go over to Dr. Beckjord, who's a clinical psychologist as well, as Dr. Pagoto is. And Dr. Beckjord, what are you seeing at UPMC in the population that you manage? I think that's roughly 4 million lives or something in the health plan that you help manage and make sure the care is going in the right direction for these good people. So what are you seeing?
So some of what we've seen that I'm sure Dr. Chu and Dr. Dyson and Dr. Pagoto have seen is the way that the pandemic has really exposed and exacerbated known health disparities. Populations that were vulnerable before the pandemic are being disproportionately affected by it, and even more vulnerable now. And so a lot of the work that we've been doing at the health plan has been to figure out how to identify those vulnerable populations and reach out to them and deliver service to them, make sure that they can connect to care. So that's sort of with my population health hat on, though what I've seen, kind of, if I put my psychologist hat on, is locally here in Pittsburgh, I had an opportunity to participate in a project where we interviewed lots of local families to learn about the experiences they were having, just from sort of a very human perspective. And I think if we're thinking a little bit or talking about post-traumatic growth, one of the big ideas that I took away from what we learned in connecting with these folks is it has to do with time. So one of the most significant effects of the pandemic, I think, has been on time, sort of how we experience time, how much time we have available. You know, sometimes people refer to what's going on as the great pause, you know, because so many things have stopped. And that's opened up time for lots of things, including growth, right? Because growth takes time. There's nothing on earth that grows instantaneously, right? Growth always takes time. And so I think that the time that has been opened up by the pause that the pandemic has forced has created for some folks time for growth, you know, and that's really what we heard from people when we talked to them: growth in their understanding of themselves, of their families. But back to this issue of equity, I mean, this is sort of true before the pandemic, right? All growth, self-care, behavior change, health, all of these things take time. And that's one of the greatest inequities we have. You know, in America, communities of color, traditionally underserved communities, one of the things that they have the most scarcity of is time. You don't have a lot of time left over for growth or self-reflection or self-care. If you have to work multiple jobs, you know, if you're really struggling to meet your basic needs. So I think the pandemic's effect on time has affected everyone, but we have to keep being mindful of how equity with respect to time and time available for growth, how it can be equitable and not only benefit people who were doing pretty well before this happened to begin with.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Dyson. What's been the impact on your patients? You know, your patient base are folks that are already struggling, you know, for their lives, fighting for their lives, fighting cancer. You know, the added stressor of this time. How
I was on mute.
I hear you now.
You know, I just want to marry something that Dr. Beckford and Dr. Chu just sort of mentioned. You know, there is an issue with equity, especially, you know, as everybody's embracing telehealth, we are forgetting that there are people across even the little state of Rhode Island who don't have smartphones or access to Wi-Fi or even a computer in the house. So it's a very big challenge to just say, you know, telehealth will solve health equity. That has been far beyond the experience. And on that same side, this whole notion of pandemic fatigue that Dr. Chu sort of mentioned, right? That seems to also cross. I mean, we all know that the disproportionate severity of the illness is in folks with comorbid conditions, cancer, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, but that it also strikes Black and brown people far more than it does white people. But, you know, if you take a look at this sort of intersectional approach to how the pandemic has changed healthcare, especially in cancer, number one, the pandemic and the response to the pandemic across populations, I am actually seeing the same level of fatigue no matter what people's risks are. And within cancer care, what I'm seeing is the equity is playing out in the access to telehealth. You know, if you need a translator, that's just another barrier to adopting telehealth. We're rolling out patient-reported outcomes, but no, it's not available in Chinese. You know, so as we're growing, we are confronting very directly, and I totally agree, equity is becoming something you can no longer discuss in the pandemic, in how we improve things. It just is front and center.
Dr. Chu, when I lived in Portland, you know, one of the things that I guess, and I didn't really realize it until I moved away, was, you know, there's not a lot of cultural diversity in Portland. It's a very white town for the most part. You know, it's just. are you seeing more folks come to the hospital, more minorities, more people of color? Are they coming in for treatment?
I mean, definitely. We have kind of these dual, we're calling them dual pandemics right now. We have COVID, and then we also have a really active city in terms of protests against racism. And because of that, there's unprecedented violence. And of course, that's also disproportionately affecting Black and Brown people, but particularly our Black citizens. The racial disparities in COVID also are so marked in Oregon. I mean, you think, well, we don't even have that much diversity to see any disparity. But if you look at the patients coming into our hospital, I mean, almost 50% of the COVID positive patients are Hispanic or Latino. They make up I think about 12% of the state. And so there's this incredible disparity. And like Dr. Dizon said, it's not just that there's, this disease, this pandemic, and there is, on the side, there's this disparity. It is the distinguishing feature of this pandemic and the way that it's played out in the United States. And we are headed into vaccine distribution that has no idea how to deliver a vaccine to underprivileged communities. But I would say, yes, from the very beginning, what's been very striking is how the demographics in our ED visits, particularly related to COVID, shifted. So much so that people asked me to look at it. People who don't, I do health disparities research as part of my job, but just, kind of people in the trenches who just do clinical work were like, this feels different. One of our advanced practice providers, one of our PAs, said that she's seen more Black patients at OHSU this summer than she's seen in the rest of her career at OHSU. So I don't have numbers for you, but it's pretty striking how true that is for a host of different causes. So not just COVID, certainly COVID, but not just COVID, but also, kind of this buildup of violence, and also the mental health toll, I think, is very huge on our Black and Brown populations right now, and you can see that in our psychiatric hallway.
Dr. Beckjord, I know you've worked on a book this summer, spring and summer, that you co-authored a book that's really, I'll let you tell more about it, but my takeaway from the book is that it's stories of families, just like all of us, the shared connection of humanity as we go through this thing. And as I read the book, and the stories in the book, it's good to see myself in there. It's good to have that empathy button pushed. And at the end of the book, I felt better about where I am with the pause, knowing that, I'm not alone. These people are writing down some of the same exact feelings that I'm having. And I took some growth away from reading that book, but share that with us. It'd be great.
Sure. So my best friend here in Pittsburgh is a photographer. And when the pandemic started, her business, like so many others, really just kind of came to a complete halt. She photographs weddings and bar mitzvahs, and all of these events that she's typically photographing were getting canceled. So she decided to start shooting portraits of people and families on the front porches of their house. So she could stay very far away. She has this huge lens. And she just started going around asking people if they wanted to have a photograph taken to sort of mark this moment in time. And as she started doing this, we were talking about it, and she mentioned that it seemed like people really had a lot to say when she would go and take these pictures, which, for me as a person trained in qualitative research and, as a behavioral scientist, I really wanted to know what they were saying, and I wanted to kind of archive it. So we came up with a process where after the photo was taken, we'd connect with who she'd photographed and ask them 5 questions. What do you miss? What are you enjoying? What are you learning? What is surprising you? And what do you hope for? And we thought, these pictures are all sort of the same, right? They're people and families on the porches of their homes. But of course, each picture is different. And we thought, well, if we ask everyone the same questions, we'll probably still get really unique answers. And as you said, I mean, this book to me is a number of examples of ways people are finding opportunities for growth during trauma. You know, people talked about self-discovery. You know, one family said that the quarantine had exposed the closet extroverts and the closet introverts in their home, but that she hopes this moment results in everyone blossoming into who they really are. A mom and with her daughter said that, you know, the experience of being home with her daughter and kind of having less input from the broader world as they kind of cocooned in place, you know, made her realize that she is a good mom, that she doesn't have to try. And so many people said very pointed things about the challenges that we face, you know, sort of it's kind of always darkest before the dawn idea. Like, one of my favorite stories in the book is a woman who said she's realized that, you know, democracy is currently dead, capitalism is unsustainable and not congruent with human health, but that she hopes that this is a turning point for us, right? So think across all of these different instances, knowing and just being in the acknowledging how bad things have been, right? Have been for so many people for a long time, but how bad they are, and having to acknowledge that and respond to that capitalize on opportunity to advance equity, to promote growth, to not return to the things that maybe we weren't able to change before, but now with some perspective can certainly say we don't want to return to. Even things with like how we deliver care and, you know, being able to deliver care in new ways. Like, that's where I think the post-traumatic growth is coming from, is in through a lot of pain, to be sure. But now that we're able to kind of, you know, the pandemic has just thrown everything up into the air. And I feel like that gives us an opportunity to look at it from a new perspective and to be intentional about what we want to hold on to and what we want to say, you know, we're going to let that float away because it wasn't serving us before and it's not going to serve us now. And I think it takes a lot of, you know, brave people working diligently to say, we cannot, I mean, with everything that's going on and all of us want it to be over, let's not miss the opportunity to leverage this for real transformational change, because it's not like that kind of opportunity comes around very often. And hopefully it won't come around again, but you know, we need to make what we can.
What's the website where the book is available?
Oh, the book is available on my friend's business website, which is Buzzy Photography. Her last name is Buzzy. Buzzy Photography is her business, and the book is available there. It's called Portraits: Pittsburghers on Their Porches During Quarantine.
BuzzyPhotography.com, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
.com.
Yeah.
BuzzyPhotography.com.
Yep.
All right, great. Sherry, I want to come back to you on. So I know this has been part of your research this summer as well on college students. You know, we see really the news only shows us the shit, you know, that's all they show us. And so we look at these kids that have come back to school and, you know, it's a fraternity party and everybody's doing what we do in college, you know, standing upside down on kegs and funneling beer and dancing and having a good time with, you know, which the college experience. And so we see those things in the media, those things in the news. And we think, oh my goodness, you know, what are these kids doing? Nobody's wearing a mask, nobody's social distancing. You know, and I can't think that that's every college student. You know, I think that the majority of college students are being responsible. You know, what are you finding in the research?
Yeah, you know, as Dr. Beckjord was talking, I was thinking so much about how the power of photo to lead a narrative about something. And so I'm so excited about the work that she's doing with the photographer because of exactly what you're saying, is that the photo narrative of what's going on with young people is that they're just flouting safety guidelines, having keg parties and that sort of thing. And sure, like that's going on. But I would not say that's at all the narrative of what their lives are about, or that does reflect the majority, like you're saying. In fact, many, if not most of the students we talk to are very concerned about the pandemic, about getting COVID themselves. They feel that they're being held responsible for the spread because they see, on college campuses, there's some spread. Particularly, some colleges are much worse than others. Thank goodness UConn has really done a great job keeping it under control. But they do feel blamed and shamed. And a lot of that is because of the media narrative about, what college students are doing, that they don't care. I mean, we have students who say they're terrified of the risk that they could contract it and spread it to their family members. This is a real concern that keeps them up at night. I had one individual who had gotten COVID, and he said he had went to his university's medical student health center, and they basically chewed him out and blamed him. They said, "You're the reason we have to close campus and go online for 2 weeks. I hope you're happy." And he's sick. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so not the kind of thing we want happening. And so I think this is sort of an example of where the photo narrative is actually leading to making this worse for a group of people if they feel like it's on their shoulders every time they see a headline about universities. And there's this fear that many of us have that work with undergraduate students, that a lot of the decisions that universities and colleges are making have created some of the conditions of where we do see spread on university campuses, but then the fall guy is the students. And, and so that I think adds, back to the mental health impacts of this.
It's like,
so Nick,
yes.
Hey Nick, let me just jump in on Sherry, because I'm gonna have to leave at 9. But my daughter, it just started college in South Carolina, and all I can do is look at the experience through her eyes, and she has not handled this well, and I think it's very problematic. But I think it's because everything that's a rite of passage just disappeared. So she was robbed of her senior year, and I've still spoken to folks who started residencies early, right, because of the pandemic, and they graduated med school without the fanfare. They did match lists without a celebration. There was no champagne shared when they opened their match list and found out where they were going for residency. Graduations for our fellows, it was truncated, and everybody just left as soon as they could to start their jobs. There is a generation seeing a loss of these rites of passage, and at least in my daughter's mind frame, she just needed to hang on to something that she could actually believe in and trust. And unfortunately, it wasn't the science. So I think where her university has come in is to say, hardline has to play here. You guys have to take care of each other, and that line has worked. But coming at her with science didn't work very well.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Don. Where did she go to school?
She's in South Carolina at Coastal Carolina University.
Okay, nice. Esther, back in Portland, from where we are today, like I said, we know we're close to a vaccine. When regular flu season's ramping up, I know you're going into the 90-day rainy season now. What's the forecast for the ED for the winter? How are you guys prepared?
Oh man, so in Portland and everywhere, I think we're all bracing for a really rough winter clinically. And the funny thing is, last winter, 2019, 2020, that wasn't fun either. It's completely been, overshadowed by COVID, but I don't know if any of you remember, last flu season was rough. I mean, it was a lot of flu B, and people were very sick. And there were a lot of patients we sent to the intensive care unit. I remember in January, I was like, I may have cursed the entire world, because I was like, whew, we're finally out of flu season. We can get a break. And then, global pandemic descended. So I think that was kind of the equivalent of saying, it's quiet in the ED tonight. But it's certainly, what's happening here is we are now recovering from, we're trying to make up for the fact that we delayed all our elective surgeries and a lot of elective care, and all of that is kind of coming calling right now. So surgeries are really being crunched in as much as possible. ORs are running over time. And these are patients who some of them were complex patients who waited a little bit too long for their surgery. So we're seeing a lot of surgical complications. And then just delayed care of all kinds is showing up in our ED. So our hospitals are getting maxed out from that. I would say this is, all across the state. And then we're starting to see more COVID trickle in, and we're bracing for flu. And so, we have a lot of kind of sarcastic comments about this is a great time to take all the vacation we have stored up for when we couldn't take vacation because we were bracing for COVID and doing double backup. It's just going to be really rough. There's just no question between now and the foreseeable future until we turn the corner and start getting out of flu season, I think, and into having a vaccine. I will say, to touch on some of the points that the other speakers have noted is in terms of mental health of frontline workers. I think this is definitely a rough time, but I will point out one thing that I think has been positive. If you looked at, there was a study of one of the New York hospitals, I think it was Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, where they took a survey of the mental health stressors on frontline workers when New York was peaking, when they were right in their surge in April. And there was a lot of anxiety and stress and depression for sure. But actually the majority of people said they also had a renewed sense of purpose during that time that helped. And I think that is what sustains us. I personally feel physically and emotionally exhausted a lot of the time, but at the same time, I have no doubt that, that my energies are going to a good place in this time. And I think that's what helps us. I think, 9 months into this thing in the U.S., we all do need to take a break and, just remember the heart feeds itself first. Like, you have to sustain yourself for efforts. And I think there's a lot of good practices in therapy that healthcare workers need to take advantage of. But I also think there's something about a renewed sense of purpose and this feeling of connection with others who are also fighting so hard that has been a silver lining of all of this.
Yeah. Don, I know you have to go, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to, if you had any last things you wanted to share. Don may have already gone. Okay, yeah, he had a hard stop at the top of the hour. So, Dr. Beckjord, I'm going to come back to you and beyond the book, right? So those stories that you collected, beyond the book, when you apply those to the global situation, what's been the like, wow, this book is right on the money on this?
Oh, I think I'll want to build on what Dr. Dyson said and what Dr. Chu just talked about, and Dr. Pagoto too, which is this notion of connection, right? And all of us on this panel are connected through the Pink Socks movement, which is, I think, no coincidence, a movement around connection, and I think that's what will see us through personally and collectively, and I'd love to hear Sherry talk. Sherry is a really world-renowned master of communication and how to communicate. And what I recently have seen, others maybe have too, I think a nice piece of communication, because it's quite simple, about the 3 W's: wear a mask, wash your hands, and watch your distance. But I would add a 4th W, which is we are all in this together. And I think if we can, and so many people are, just recognize the importance of caring for one another, caring for ourselves so that we can care for one another. But as complicated as the novel coronavirus is and all of the ways that it's affected all of our sort of societal structures and systems, I can't help but think, and I know this is a little bit of an oversimplification, but I can't help but think that there are also some very uncomplicated basic principles that are key to seeing us through. One of which is how do we, amid so much fear and scarcity that is very real for so many people, so these aren't easy conditions to do this in, but how do we really double down, especially for those of us who are going through this experience with so many advantages, how do we really commit to caring for others, to recognizing our shared connections, to going the extra step of helping people who need help? That if everyone just did that a little bit more, and again, I know that's like a little Pollyanna-ish, but I think it is going a really long way and would continue to, it's going to be what we need, because as Dr. Chu said, I mean, we're bracing, all of us want to break. Guess what? Like, this reminds me of a time I did a triathlon and I realized I was halfway through the bike ride and I was feeling pretty good. And then immediately I became aware that I had not managed my nutrition well and I, bonked, as they said. And I thought, oh boy, how am I going to get through the last 12 miles of this ride? We're going to have to push through. And there are easier and harder ways to do that. I hope that we can continue to collectively lean into kindness and love and empathy, everything that the Pink Socks movement is about, to do the time a little easier wherever we can.
Yeah,
if I could, I was just going to jump in and add something to that if I could.
Please.
So one of the questions we asked when we were doing interviews with undergrads was, what's one thing your professors did that made you feel like they cared about you? And the answers were so fascinating. And the most common answer was, well, there were actually two of them. One was when the professor would just sort of pause in class and say, let's just talk about all of this. Like, this is hard, this is rough. What's everybody feeling and thinking? And just like took a few minutes to just, set the lecture aside and the business as usual to have this conversation. And the next thing that people talked about is when that occurred on a one-on-one basis, some professors were like, if you need to talk, let me know. You can call me, you can email me. If this is hard, we can have that one-on-one discussion. So that kind of along the lines of what Dr. Beckjord was saying is like that little bit of time that professors put into expressing empathy and opening up a conversation about how hard this is, amidst all the chaos and the online learning and everything else, completely changed the way those students felt about their experience back in the spring when things were totally turned upside down. So I found that to be amazing. It really is something that I think about when I teach now, like, be sure to do that, because we're all so busy. We're like, I got to get all this in my lecture and I got to, make sure that we cover everything. And so I'm constantly thinking, pause today and reflect, calm down, like have a conversation, invite conversation, and reach out one-on-one if it seems like somebody isn't quite themselves that day.
Good. Maybe the world's becoming kinder through this. Yeah. Hope so. Yeah. Dr. Chu, if you had to give one piece of advice, one recommendation for us today on what we're going to do today to handle this, what would you say?
Just one, huh? I think the correctable thing from the very beginning that we can still get right, that we haven't gotten right yet in the US, is start with the most vulnerable populations that we never think about. I mean, if you look at the way the pandemic has played out in the US, and you look at the lists, we have all these lists of where the major outbreaks were. They're the majority. I mean, we talked a lot about, people out in crowds on the beach and stuff like that, but that's actually not where the disease is. The disease is in nursing homes, other long-term care facilities, correctional facilities, and those are places that we don't think about. You know, those are our forgotten populations, so we don't want to think about it or talk about it. But this is where the neglect is, and in every single way we have neglected these populations. I work with in the, you know, of course in the States there's been almost no national leadership around things like mobilizing supply of personal protective equipment, and so I work with a large national nonprofit. Just a grassroots effort to try to match health systems to supply of PPE. And what we found is health systems, especially large and wealthy ones, now have PPE, at least have some supply. But every smaller facility, including nursing homes, lack PPE, and that's you know, that's like 90% of our requests now is from smaller facilities. Nursing homes where all the COVID is happening, where in some states it's causing 50% of death rates, do not have PPE. And it's just amazing how are they the last to get it. And if you look at nursing homes, you know, standardizing quality, if you look at nursing homes that have a greater proportion of people of color, those nursing homes have higher rates of COVID. And so we're getting it backwards in terms of where we need to put our attention and prioritize our responsiveness to COVID. So if there's one thing we need to fix in order to actually end this thing, we need to flip privilege, you know, go to the vulnerable and needy areas first and work backwards from there. So hopefully we can do that with vaccine and with supply going forward.
That's great. Thank you. Dr. Pagoto, what's your one thing that we can do to move forward as we go through this trauma together? What's your one thing that you recommend?
Yeah, that's a big question. From in the work that I do, I'm really sort of, I'm going to keep it really simple of like, maybe we could just cut each other some slack.
Yeah.
Because this is hard for everybody and we kind of have to set some of the business as usual and rules and rigid things that we follow all the time to get our work done. We got to kind of loosen all of that up, and you know, we're all kind of making it up as we go right now. So we'll only be able to have that time to take care of ourselves if we get some slack, whether you're a professor or a student or a boss or a parent. I think that's important.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. And Dr. Beckjord, what's your one thing we need to do today to make it through the day?
Well, I'm in Pittsburgh, which is the home of Mr. Rogers, who I hope folks in the NHS are familiar with Mr. Rogers. And one of the things Mr. Rogers is famous for saying, many things, but one of them is look for the helpers. And so I would say one thing that I try to do, and I hope as many people who can should do every day, is to be one of the helpers. And to do what you can to support other people to be helpers too. So if you can be a helper, be a helper. And I really love what Sherry said too. You know, I think about that broadly, right? It might mean just helping someone, you know, who needs to get connected to services and they don't know how, or helping someone going to the grocery store for someone who doesn't feel comfortable leaving their house because they might be frail or elderly, or being part of, you know, big movements like what Dr. Chu talked about, helping to connect supplies to the places that, I mean, there's so many ways to be a helper. All of them are important. So I'd say be a helper.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank each of you for sharing your morning with us. I mean, just so good to see your smiling faces. And again, I'd like to thank Roy and Jane and Teresa and the folks.
We're here. I'm here, Nick. I was watching every second of that, and thank you so much, all of you. And you know what? It's just so interesting to know that we are not the only nation that's made a mess of this, and we are not the only nation that's facing the mother of all problems and messes as well. I mean, this is really, however big a nation, however smart it is, however much money it's got, managing this has been an absolute challenge for everyone, hasn't it? And I was listening to Sherry when she was talking about the kids at university. I mean, we cleverly opened our universities and sent everybody back to university. Now, of course, guess what? We've got, thousands of kids with positive COVID tests. They can't go anywhere. They're all locked down on the university. And now we're all thinking, how do we get them home in time for Christmas? We're going to put them on trains and they're going to travel through the country, spreading goodwill to all men and COVID. It's just been a complete nightmare. Nick, you thanked your speakers, and I want to add that. And so thank you. But we must thank you because you've just arranged a lineup of a battery of big brains and entertaining speakers. And thank you so much. And it's thank you for what you've done to pull this together. Thank you for being the inspiration that you are with your Pink Socks movement. Thank you for inspiring me to become part of it. And thank you for the support you've given the Academy of Fabulous Stuff. We're enormously grateful to you. And we send our love. And I'm doing one of those Trump things, where I'm coming into the audience and I'm going to kiss you all. The Trump moment we saw at TV here. Then we go, oh no, stay there. So I'm giving you a mwah, mwah, I'm kissing you all. I'm sending you loads of this stuff as well. And bless you. And thank you so much. And last word with you, Nick.
Well, Roy, I hope when the travel opens back up and the plane lands at Heathrow, that when I step off that plane, I hope you're the first hug.
I'll be there.
Okay.
I'll be there. And you know what? I won't be wearing this. Going out without a mask, I used to go out when I was a bank robber. I used to go out with a mask, and everybody noticed. Now no one notices. Yeah.
No, it's mask up. I've been telling people mask up, stay happy, stay healthy, and it's we're all singing the same song here. Be kind to each other, and we're gonna get through this. So.
If ever there was a time for Pink Socks kindness, it's now.
Right.
Give yourself a pat on the back. Give yourself a pat on the back.
All right. Okay.
Thank you so much, Nick, Sherry, Ellen, Esther, and for Don for being with us earlier. It's been an amazing session. We're really grateful for your time. Thanks so much for getting up early this morning and contributing before your day starts. And you're, of course, welcome to stick around if there's any more that you can join us with. But listen, seriously, Nick, great to see you. Look forward to seeing you in the future. We're going to invite our next guest to the next session now.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Shane.